Okay, so show me the...
So we're actually in the southeast corner of Jerusalem, and we're in the corner of the Jewish part of Jerusalem, what would be called West Jerusalem. And what's interesting is that the view, you can actually see the separation and the difference between how the Jews and the Arabs build.
Yeah, you don't even need to tell me. I can see, like, immediately what side is considered the Jewish part and what's the Palestinian part.
Yeah.
And so where's the wall?
So you see on the left is this neighborhood that my parents live in and I grew up in. And on the right is a village or a neighborhood called Sur Bacher, which is still in... We're already getting into complicated terms. And then further back, so we can see really farther back in the background, the edge of the Judean desert. And we don't see the wall, but we're kind of looking into the area and the territories in the back that are already clearly in the area of Palestinian territories in the West Bank. North of the Judean desert, close to Bethlehem, there's just a whole area of villages there that I was realizing recently that I've never been even close to. And it's like, I don't even know anything about it. It's farther away than Hawaii. This place that I can look at is... From your
house. You can see it from your
window. I can see
it
from my house, but in so many ways it's farther away, and like I can feel how distant it is, how it's... Like Hawaii is accessible, I can get on a plane and go there, but that I can see from my house is not.
I mean, technically it's accessible. You could go there if you wanted to, but most Israelis wouldn't do that.
Right.
Most Jewish Israelis wouldn't do that.
Yeah. And the feeling about it is that it's just so distant, that it's a different world. And that's what it feels like.
Hi, everybody. As you probably already know, my name is Yahav. If this is the first episode you're listening to, nice to meet you. And I was born and raised as an Israeli and as a Zionist. During the past few years, I've gone through the process of questioning the narrative I grew up with regarding this land we live in and the people living on it. This podcast is about voices of the disillusioned. Each episode is a one-on-one heartfelt conversation with an activist who supports the Palestinian struggle, telling the story of the journey that led them to see through what they were taught. Each of these people have their own unique path that I believe anyone can learn from, whether you're a Palestinian or a Jew, living here or abroad, or just anyone who feels strongly about this subject. I hope you learn as much as I learned from them about how to build a better future for all people between the river and the sea. This episode is with Eran. He is a healer in every sense of the word, using different methods to help himself and people around him deal with the immense pain that violence in our lives has caused. In his work, he addresses the concepts of forgiveness, both inner and outer. And even though he's one of the best listeners I've ever encountered, he's got a lot of wisdom himself to share with anyone who's willing to listen. Enjoy the episode. So hi, Eran.
Hi, Yahav.
I want you to tell me a little bit about young Eran. Right now you are 31, going on 32. And so I want to know a little bit about who Eran was when he was a child and what kind of reality did you grow up in?
So I'll start from the beginning. I was born in Canada, in Toronto, in the year 1989, the week of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Symbolic, actually. Yes. And my parents had actually met in Jerusalem when they were 19. They were both Americans, and they were studying a year abroad in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and that's where they met and fell in love and went back to New York, got married there, and they always knew they would make Aliyah, which means they would come and make their life in the Jewish homeland in Israel. And they moved to Toronto for work. My father is a rabbi, so he was a rabbi in a synagogue, and my mother was a director of a Jewish summer camp. So they were very involved in the Jewish community, and they moved there for work, knowing that after a few years they would move to Israel, which they did. My mom's family had already moved from the US to Israel. So that was always kind of her dream, and she knew her whole life that she would live in Israel. And at the time, it was me and my two brothers. So I was around 4.5 when we moved to Israel. And it was part of the dream. My parents tell the story as they wanted to raise their children in the best Jewish environment possible. And that was part of their dream, to have us grow up and live where everyone is Jewish and the holidays are Jewish and the surroundings, the people, the life, everything about it is connected to this Jewish tradition that they really loved. They were really connected to it.
And then you came here and you lived in Jerusalem, and they sent you to a religious school?
Yeah. So I learned until 6th grade, until I was around 11, 12, in a mixed Jewish religious school.
Mixed between?
Girls and boys. And then it's from 7th grade until 12th grade, so high school and junior high, I was in a just all boys religious school. So just boys, just religious, upper middle class in the center of Jerusalem. And it's kind of a special kind of environment because it's unique in a way that there's a modern Judaism. There's a lot of talk about philosophy. The sciences are as important as the religious studies, so there's a lot of emphasis put on both. And it's this kind of modern Jew where I'm also an intellectual. I also care about the world and the sciences in some sense, but I'm also very connected to the roots, to the Jewish tradition, to the Jewish law, to keeping all the rules and the halacha, as we call it, the traditions.
And politically, the school you went to and the youth movement that you belonged to was part of like a wider political stream of what we call in Hebrew the religious nationals, or national religious people. So the religion is very connected in many ways to the Zionism and to the Israeli part of it. So how did you feel this was part of your life then?
So we have these small kippas. If you imagine a Orthodox Jew with the black kippah or the black hat and the long sideburn peyot, and so that's one image of a Jew. And then there's the secular Jew that just looks like a Western person. And then there's this modern Jew with the small knitted kippah, the head covering, the skull cap. And part of the religion kind of blends into the world view, which is we're here as a fulfillment of the Jewish dream. And this is part of why the army is such an important part for this community. So the military is kind of put as this fulfillment of the Jewish dream. And this was very present in my high school. There's so much pride around where you go, where you do your military service. If you're an officer, if you're in an elite combat unit, it's kind of really trickled in a very subtle but heavy way that this is how we show and express our love for the Jewish tradition and for the land.
So it's like the more you give from yourself to the army, the more you're a better Jew in this specific community.
Yeah, in a way it's
connected.
You can't separate almost. It's very hard. Even though I did meet along the way a few left-wing religious Jews who kind of said that we don't have to connect these two parts.
In this community, in this school?
Yeah, because it's more of a liberal and there is a deep connection to being the modern Jew and to open our mind to see other worldviews. So the name of the school, and they also have an institute that studies and learns Jewish philosophy, the Hartman Institute. They're deeply involved in this opening to the wider world. So you can find some people along the way that have other views,
but no like anti-Zionism. Like that's not something that's accepted or.
I never even heard about it. Like,
like you never even heard about an Israeli Jew that's an anti-Zionist when you were growing up.
We hear about the ultra-Orthodox that are anti-Zionist because God is not ready for us to build the third temple, and therefore when we created the Jewish homeland or the Jewish state, it was our human decision and we didn't let the hand of God do it. So there are some ultra-Orthodox communities that are anti-Zionist, that we learned about them in school. But to think of a modern Jew that's anti-Zionist, it's not, you can't even imagine it. It's so far away from, like, Zionism is life, is the truth, is this dream that's come true, and we're marveling and loving. There's a lot of love, and it's like very positive, this kind of Zionism where we love our tradition, we love what we do, and we love this homeland, and this is a dream come true for us.
And most people, especially most boys, the best thing you can do for your community is serve in the army and serve the wider, Jewish Israeli community. And do you also feel like this is your duty, this is what you want to do? Is it something that someone's expecting from you? Or do you really feel like there's this inner, passion to be part of this as well?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, it's hard to separate. You're young, you're 17, 18-year-old, you're getting all these stories from your surroundings. Every year you commemorate the Memorial Day for the fallen soldiers. It's this holy day, and there's so much energy put into these stories of these heroes. And you see the heroes that were in the same high school as you, and they're like, and you have this awe towards these boys or these men that are real live heroes. So it's really hard. Now I can look back and say, wow, I was young, naive, easy to be told a story and to go with it. But it's really kind of mixed, blended in together, as I really feel like this is the truth and this is what I need to do and the best fulfillment of my own life. And along with that, I'm doing what is expected, and what, my surroundings and my teachers and my family and everyone around me is kind of putting this on to me. So it's really a mix of both. And specifically in my family, my parents grew up in the US, so they didn't serve in the military. So I didn't have the kind of pride other friends of mine had, their father as this figure who was in the military, and they have to follow his footsteps, and there's a lot of energy and kind of pressure in that. So I didn't have that family part, but I did have that personal and that surrounding aspects.
And I want to ask you about specifically combat units. Like, did you go to these, they have these days. In 12th
grade. In 11th grade, there was a officer in reserves who would come to the high school and start speaking to us about the military, and
like trying to recruit you to the elite units, because that's voluntary.
Exactly.
Like you can just go wherever the army takes you, but you can also make an extra effort and try and get accepted to an
elite unit requires extra, not only physical shape to be strong and to be in good shape, but a very powerful mental strength. So from 11th grade, I was going once or twice a week with this army man. He would come in his uniform. We would start training from when I was 16. This was on my mind of how am I going to get into the best unit? How am I going to strengthen my body and my mind to be ready for this experience? And then in 12th grade, you start to get into the system, and they invite you to these recruitment days where they pretty much kick your ass. Like, they have you crawling and running and sprinting for hours just to see when you're going to break and who's going to break first, and in order to get into these more elite units in the army.
And so you went to one of these and you got accepted.
So the unit I went to is the paratrooper unit. So it was a single day. There are more elite units than that, but since I had glasses, I wasn't invited to the top of the top, but I knew that if I would get into the paratroopers, it would open a door to get into another elite unit later on. So that was kind of in my mind. It was like, I'm going to start with this step and I'm going to get into a more elite unit. And I did that when I was in 12th grade.
Did you feel then that you were aware of what you're aware of now, which is how much of this is fueled by the need to prove your masculinity as well?
Not at all. This is not in the awareness. It's kind of underlying, of course, but there's a competition, the guys, who's stronger, who gets into a more elite unit. The names are kind of out there of who's stronger, who's better. And it was clearly, I was the smart guy. So I was very good at math, very good at school, got the best grades. And that's not the most masculine, and I had even more of an incentive to prove myself to be in one of these units, to show, no, I don't just have brains. I'm also as we say, a gever, like a real man.
So kind of the army sometimes is people's chance to kind of start anew and reinvent themselves in certain ways. When you went to the army, how did you feel when you were doing your service?
Yeah, well, as I was saying, I was preparing myself to get into an elite combat unit, an infantry unit, which means we're not the Air Force, we're not in tanks, it's just the ground troops. And I got into a unit that's known actually for undercover operations. And it kind of has its reputation also of people going a bit crazy sometimes after being in this unit because they've gone through very difficult experiences, and also for this intensity and for the possibility of being undercover in the West Bank or in Palestinian territories. In order to get in, the first week I was in the military, I had to do another one of those training weeks where they were just testing our body and mind to the limits. And I knew that that's what I wanted, so I was able to push through and really, it's like really reaching your limits of what you think you can and then going a lot farther. And then I got into this unit and spent the next year and 2 months in training, and very intense training, just to finish your combat training to become a troop, a soldier. And then I was sent on a commander path. So immediately 2 months after the training ended, I went to another 3 months of commander's training. And a month after I finished my commander's training, I was sent to officer's training. So I actually spent the first 2 years and 4 months almost fully being trained.
Wow.
Very intensely.
So this whole time, you don't see a single Palestinian?
In the 2 months between the first training and commander's training and the 1 month between commander's training and officer's training, I'm put into a few operations in the West Bank. There's a thing about the officers that are sent immediately into officers training without the field experience that's kind of problematic. So they kind of wanted to push me in a little bit, but it was just a kind of a taste.
So what are these operations? Like, is it arresting people in the middle of the night, kind of going into refugee camps?
Exactly it. So what's good or bad, I don't know if it's good or bad, about these elite units is that they don't, the work is more sexy. You don't do any checkpoints. If you're working at a checkpoint, it means you haven't done this intense training, you haven't passed all these tests, you're just a regular combat soldier, and then you spend a lot of your 3 years in the military standing for 8-hour shifts, watching cars go by for a whole day, and that's considered like, nobody wants to really do that. In our unit, we have the privilege that we don't do that. We do the sexy work, which is the middle of the night arrests and operations of going into refugee camps, Palestinian cities, to arrest the dangerous people who are planning terrorist attacks or different actions.
And do you remember a certain something that you feel? Is there something that that really stayed with you?
There's not like a flash or a picture of something so intense that happened to me. I can say I'm very, very fortunate that I was never put in a real life-endangering situation. There's a fear Every time you get ready and you go into the armored vehicle, getting ready to go into a Palestinian village or town, and you load a bullet into your weapon. So it's like on the daily walking around with your rifle, you don't have a bullet ready to be fired. It's like as soon, right before you get into the armored vehicle, you are ready to use it in a way. And so there's an intense feeling and a fear kind of that I really remember around.
Like you're acknowledging
that.
like this is the real deal.
Yeah.
No, I'm not just,
It's not training anymore. Yeah. And then the moments that are intense that I remember is, having rocks being thrown at inside the armored vehicles, coming
even in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So these are like kids or just young people realizing that there is an army jeep coming into their refugee camp and then just immediately starting to throw rocks at the vehicle.
Exactly.
And does this scare you? Like when
Yeah, for sure. There's something about the armored car that, you feel protected, but there are enough, they show you enough videos and stories of the armored cars lighting on fire, and that it's not it's bulletproof in a sense, but it doesn't.
It's not totally.
Yeah, you can get into really deep shit even in these cases if they corner you, if you're left alone, if there are a lot of people. That's why these are kind of more sensitive operations. We're going in the middle of the night. You really want to be as subtle as you can and not awaken the village or the town, because you know that that's dangerous.
And also when you have rocks thrown at you, you feel the hostility in a real way. This is like someone's actually willing to throw rocks at me is something that I'm assuming that you didn't experience beforehand.
Well, it's funny because I grew up in a neighborhood right by an Arab neighborhood, and when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, they would throw rocks at our school. So,
oh wow!
So I kind of it's
so there. This feeling of
I know the feeling. Yeah, it's very different when you're a soldier,
and when you're in a car that protects you.
Yeah, but I also remember the feeling in the car is it's a different kind of vulnerability, because there were operations where you're kind of standing outside the car waiting for the other soldiers to come back, or going into a house. So I had a few of those where I was actually going in to do the arrest itself. And then when you're out of the car, everything is like, you don't have a lot of time. And it's just this very intense, like, we got to get out of here as fast as possible, because if the village wakes up, somebody's going to whistle, and all the young guys are just going to wake up
within
seconds and minutes and be chasing us, or they'll start a riot or whatever. And on the other hand, it's like there were nights we would go in and there were just people walking by.
Really?
In the middle of the night, people who are awake, people who are going home, and every once in a while, I have a memory of like standing outside of the armored car waiting for us to leave, and people are just walking by, and they're kind of not hostile, and they're confused.
And they're probably just so tired.
Yeah.
Just tired of living in these conditions.
Yeah. And as a soldier, it's just like yell, check, make sure they're not dangerous, and then just yell at them to go the other direction and leave. If they're not, they don't seem threatening.
Like that's the only thing you care about as a soldier is this human a threat to me right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do remember like entering actually inside a house once or twice or a few times. And that's also a very intense experience, going in with this, we're going to find a specific guy in his bed, maybe in the middle of the night, who's not ready for the army to come. It's, I can imagine, extremely intimidating and scary. You know, the soldiers are fully armed, masks, just like I can't even imagine what it would be like to be woken up like that in the middle of the night.
Or to have to be the wife or the children of that person woken up as well.
Yeah.
Did you at a certain point feel that there was something wrong about what you were doing?
Not really. I didn't stop to question too much, even though it's like we're speaking values all the time. This is the language that we have, these values, and we are moral, and we don't use a power more than we need to. We're the most moral military in the world. We're the only moral military in the world. This is a very strong story. And the feeling is, at every step of the way, this is the most important thing I can do right now. I'm here to protect my mother, my sister, my family at home. I grew up in Jerusalem when I was in high school in the years 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4. There were weekly bombings in buses and cafes close to my school, close to my home. It's like the threat is real. They're out to get us. There are real terrorists. They want to and can kill innocent civilians, including my own family. And this job that I'm doing is the most important thing I can do. And I'm here on this almost divine mission.
There's also a totally direct connection between those suicide bombings in the cafes and in the buses, and between this, picking. When you're in the army, picking someone from a refugee camp, is you're feeling what this person.
Feeling. They're telling us. The story is we go and we're getting ready and we know what this person is planning. Mm-hmm. And they tell us the more sensitive they are, if they're armed, if they're what kind of organization they're a part of, what are they planning. And sometimes they'll call us back on a weekend because someone is planning something the next day. And I was called back dozens of times.
Like while you're at home?
I'm at home.
With your family?
With my family, and I get a phone call saying, get back now. We're going in tonight because we have information and we know where this guy is right now, and tomorrow he might be
blowing himself up.
Exactly.
And so this direct line between this guy that you're waking up in the middle of the night and arresting, and between the suicide bombings that you have literally seen happen right next to your house and right next to your school, there's no doubt that can be left in this whole world, this whole story that you're living in. There's no way that it's wrong.
No, there's nothing. And the friction is so little. There's actually one story in my unit where there was somebody woke up, a few young guys, they saw there was military, they started throwing or running. Something happened, they took out a knife, and the guys in my unit had to shoot him. And they didn't kill him, but he was lying on the ground. And one of the soldiers came and kicked him when he was on the ground.
Like out of vengeance?
Out of anger, out of an expression of, I'm the boss, or
like, vengeance. How dare you try and take a knife out when we're trying to arrest him?
I think he stabbed one of the soldiers. So one of the soldiers was injured, and it was kind of this expression of...
And this is also, you're injuring my friend. Like my comrade.
And in my unit, they made a huge deal out of it. I think they even sent this soldier who kicked the guy into prison because it was a misuse of his power.
And this is when you see something like that happen, you
it's
really are convinced.
Of our morality,
you're
sure.
convinced that there's no way that we're not moral. If this guy, just for kicking, So there's no way, there's no way to doubt it.
Right. I can see the guys around me. Some of them are hot-headed. Some of them don't have as much intelligence. Some of them aren't as morally sound as others. I'm an officer, commander. I've been trained also in my morality to be stronger in my principles and know right and wrong. So this is part of my training. But I know some of the guys aren't as straight. But I know that the system is going to make sure that if someone is out of line, they'll be put back into line, and that we're doing what we need to do. We're causing as little damage to the people, to the places as possible.
And to each other.
And to each other.
And it's interesting because you as an officer, this is kind of your job, is to make sure everybody's staying in line. But I know that there are units and there are, the combat soldiers themselves. Sometimes there's kind of an atmosphere of, you don't want to be a snitch. Kind of in a lot of other environments, like in prison or, right. There's this thing of we're not friends, we're brothers, we're family, and you don't, snitch on your family. And if someone does anything wrong, then the worst thing you can do is tell the officer about it or in some way make it known, and then that person is punished for it. So there's also that. A lot of that.
Part of the camaraderie is protecting each other.
Yeah.
And
at the expense of anyone else.
Exactly. And in other units, when the friction is so much higher, you have so much more time inside the Palestinian villages and cities and refugee camps that the amount of patience, energy you have to really keep that tension of we're just doing the minimum that we need to is not kept in the same way as my unit. So we have that privilege to be more moral.
Because you have less friction with
Exactly.
this very hostile environment where probably you have so many different, like the more you have the opportunity to be immoral, the more statistically you're going to be immoral.
Exactly.
That's like also part of it.
And you kind of lose sensitivity to what you're doing and to the people you're coming in contact with, because you're coming in contact with civilians and regular people every day, and you kind of lose that separation between the enemy and the people and who's who. So I can imagine in those units it's just so much more complicated. It's so much more sensitive. And in the unit I was in, luckily we could kind of keep that story and keep that morality to the level that was spoken about. So it was kind of like, we say we're moral, and see, this is how we behave, and it's as moral.
So it's even harder to see.
Exactly. So I didn't question from that angle because I couldn't see really anyone doing anything wrong. It seemed very clear from all directions that this is completely necessary. We're doing the best we can, causing the minimum damage and protecting the Israeli families at home. Like that there's the proof and the stories of these being bad guys. There are a few shifts that happened during my military service. One of them was that I didn't get the job that I wanted after my officer's course. And I wanted to be a commander in the basic training. So to train soldiers the same way I was trained. And actually I was put into an office job, kind of supporting the behind the scenes of the operations.
Like the logistical parts.
Right, exactly. So that was kind of a disappointment
for a combat, someone who went through 2 years and 4 months of training to be a combat commander.
Yeah. Suddenly put in an office and working on a computer, it was like, it's an insult. Well, I didn't sign up for this. And on the other hand, I had a relief that I wasn't really, I could
you weren't going to do more of that.
It was like, oh wow, thank God I don't actually have to do real operations. I'm kind of safe here. And this isn't something you're supposed to admit because you're here to be in the front line and to protect and to actually do what you're trained for. But that voice was getting stronger, I guess, during the time. And I spent all this time in training and maturing, and I'm already 21, 22. So I'm kind of getting older. And then it's like, okay, I don't have to go in right now. And then...
Interesting, but you wouldn't admit it outwardly.
I wouldn't say it to anyone, of course. And on the other side, there's my girlfriend at the time, who's encouraging me not to go to officers training, which requires me to sign on a year and a half longer addition to my first 3 years.
Because she wants you to get out
and start our life together and travel and do all these things. So if I stay longer, it's hurting our relationship. Then this first job that I don't get. And something is starting to change in me, and
like you're realizing the army isn't the most important thing in your life, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm suffering because it's really hard to be in this environment, and you give up your life and your weekends and your personal life and your freedom, and you're married to the army, and it's at a certain point you're like, what else is there out there? But also, just wow, this is really a big sacrifice. You're realizing it as you're doing it, but there's so much motivation that it's worth it until something breaks or cracks or changes. So another thing that was interesting that was happening at the time was that my girlfriend at the time started to be vegan and vegetarian and not eat meat. And she was kind of showing me the videos and the stories and the books, and it was not something I thought about, but it came into my awareness, and it suddenly became clear that it's not good to put animals in slaughterhouses and into these horrible environments in which they're tortured and treated like shit. And that actually made sense to me. And it was like, okay, I shouldn't be eating this meat, this horrible food that's taken from these poor animals. And I actually started to be vegetarian and then vegan as an officer in this very macho environment. So there was a little bit of an interesting conflict there also, because it didn't match. Like, to be a man is to eat meat, and
especially a military man.
Exactly, and a real man, and all of that. So that was there, and some things started to soften up because I had made that choice. And at one point I remember there was that question of, wait, if I'm thinking and caring so much about hurting innocent animals, could it be that the army is hurting innocent people? So it was like the comparison of maybe
there's a connection, like, with the moral part of being a vegetarian, and the moral, and there's, it
and
doesn't
just the
add
army,
up.
just the idea of
an army
suddenly didn't make the same sense
without really seeing the suffering of the Palestinian people because of the army.
Right.
Like, you didn't even have to really know what they're going through. Just the concept of an army.
Yeah. Just something about war, something about hurting the innocent, about, hurting, not even the innocent.
Just hurting anyone.
The people are maybe guilty or maybe bad people, but it's like we're using force in a way that's not so peaceful. And there was just that question that just came up through this change of diet that seems unrelated. And it kind of bubbled up inside, and I couldn't be blind to it in the same way anymore.
And vulnerability is, these are all considered like not something that you want in your life. And if you show signs of them, then you're very quickly brought back into line, back to track. Like, you're not supposed to be vulnerable. And so it's interesting that you went through this process while you were in the military, even though you were in a more logistical, you weren't actually doing combat work while you were doing it. So maybe it was even more possible to.
Right. That actually started then. My second job as an officer actually was in the field, but it was kind of as a backup team. So I still wasn't in the front line, but I was going in actually every operation I was a part of, because I was in that job that required to be in the backup, or to be in the in case something goes wrong, to rescue or to take people out. So I was very much involved, but also I had that relief of I don't have to be the guy who's pulling the guy out of the bed or in the front line, or actually and it stayed with me. So that it was kind of, there was an evolution that I was going through in my own world, in my own life. And it's like you're saying, there's a much easier transition to see animals that are suffering. There's something less threatening about that. Still, for a lot of people, to show them these videos,
of course,
it's very threatening, but there's something less threatening than showing the oppressed Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza.
Did you at that point make the connection between those kids throwing stones at you when you were a little kid, the Palestinian kids throwing stones here in a civilian area in the neighborhood, and those people in the refugee camps that you come in the middle of the night to arrest? When do you make the connection between those two pictures?
Never.
Until today, do you make the connection?
In a way. I mean, I never kind of connected. The first experience was just as a kid, and it's interesting because I didn't take it so, it didn't add any hate.
You didn't see them as Palestinians, you just saw them as they're kids that are different than me, and they're
the Arabs on the other side of in the other neighborhood, right next to our school, and maybe they're angry or violent. And it's like, in my mind, I never thought about it as the enemy.
You thought it was a cultural thing, it's part of their culture? Because I've heard that claim, they're Arabs, that's what they do, they throw stones.
In a way, but even that, I'm trying to get into my mind as a kid, and it's I didn't think about it too much. It was just kind of part of my reality, and you kind of get used to it, and just to stay away from that. But I didn't grow any hate or any animosity or any kind of, these are the bad people. It was just kind of being a bit more scared and more careful and staying away from the dangerous parts. That was my experience as a kid, and in the army it was more of the same. I never went in with any feeling that I saw in some of my friends, maybe that they have an anger, they have
like a vengeance.
A vengeance, but for me it was just very neutral in a sense of this is what I have to do. I'm very scared of the other side, but I really don't want to use any of this force or hurt anyone at all.
So I think that your like mindset and who you were then is what people around the world who support the Israeli military and who support Israel imagine all the soldiers to be, and imagine this whole system to be in that mindset that you're describing.
Yeah, and there are many soldiers, and there are many that are angry, and there are many that aren't as emotionally stable.
And they have different motives for going to the army.
I never met personally, which is funny to think about it, but I never met like a vengeful, horrible Israeli that's so hateful, and so that it was not part of my experience to meet these people. I know they're there, but I never met them. And I was also remembering there was a guy in my unit, there's kind of this macho talk of the X's on your weapon, of how many terrorists have you killed. So it was known, none of the guys in my age group were in this kind of situation where they needed to use their weapon and kill anyone.
So they didn't have any X's.
But there were these older guys who were 3, 4, 5 years above us still in the army, who it was like the locker room talk of who has more X's, or did you hear this guy, how many X's he has? And it's this kind of, it's just...
And that also doesn't come necessarily from hatred, but more from like self-glorification. And
these guys are amazing guys. And you look at them with admiration, but you look at them as these kind of cool, normal, intelligent, moral
that
people.
Have this like street cred onto them.
One of them I remember was he had a family, he had kids, and he was a great dad. And it's like there's no evil about it.
This is like your point is exactly what to me is the sign that everything is wrong. Like when I look at the society around me and what's going on, and I learn about the history and the things that have happened, especially like in my lifetime, I realize that when you don't see that anything's wrong, that's when you know that something is terribly wrong. Like what you're saying, like he had a family, he's a good person. That's the thing. The people that surround me, the Jewish Israelis that surround me, have much bigger hearts than me. Like I know people that I grew up with, or friends that I met along the way, and friends that I met in the army, by the way, that are just amazing, human loving creatures that you can't even imagine them hurting a fly, as we say. And that's when you know that the system is creating this whole, like a veil of pure, goodness.
Yeah.
That if you just are able to just put it aside, or just try to like pick it up for a few seconds, and you see through it, suddenly you see really, really dark things. Yeah. And then you're like, how is this possible? And only then can you realize that it's just a veil, that it's all just a veil. It's a really strong one and really big one, but it's a veil. And so I'm wondering, like, what happened, like, after you finished the army and you were already like a vegan? And
well, I actually want to fast forward to last month. I'm gonna skip like 10 years,
skip, like, everything,
and we'll come back to it. But just as
okay.
we're talking, I'm thinking of what was going on in Gaza last month.
Oh, okay, that's why you're skipping to last month.
Yeah, because I was actually in Sinai.
During the, oh yeah.
Yeah, we actually heard about it. I was with a group of a bunch of people from Holland. And as soon as we heard about what was going on in Israel and Gaza, we were really putting our intention and our energy and our prayers for what was going on. And as we were sitting in a group, I was connecting to the Air Force pilots. And
the ones that are dropping the bombs on Gaza.
Yes. And I was sharing with the group how much I resonated more with those Air Force pilots who are dropping the bombs on Gaza more than the victims who are being bombed on the Israeli side or the victims being bombed on the Palestinian side. It was like I could touch a part of the conflict that I'm connected to through the eyes of these big-hearted men who are good people and moral people who are here to serve the country. They're called the salt of the land. They're the highest quality, most intelligent, most, the best people you know are these Air Force pilots. And yet they're committing the worst crimes that you can imagine. And I can see myself in that obliviousness, in that not thinking about it, in that knowing what I'm doing is right.
Like suppressing any kind of doubt.
Exactly. There can't be any doubt when you're doing what you're doing in this way. And your whole training is to not think, is to do as you're told and as is necessary. And the story has to be very clear. You can't think too much, otherwise it gets too complicated.
There can't be any cracks.
No, it's a clear story. There's one story. This is the reason, and it's for protection and for the greater good. And we're willing to do things that are whatever they are for this greater good. And I could connect and see how I could have been those guys in that way. And what I could also know from my years of the healing work I've been doing and from looking and learning, and we'll talk about that also, but it's connecting to how actually maybe these Air Force pilots are traumatized in a way that's a different kind of trauma, that they carry this blood on their hands without...
Not even connecting the dots.
Exactly. And I could kind of feel that was important for me to connect to and bring to awareness these men that are an expression of some very dark evil, and how it's so confused in what's good and what's bad, because I could see myself in them, and I couldn't imagine doing something so horrible and killing children. Like, it's unimaginable. And then to hold these two truths together, to me, is this is the conflict. This is what's so confusing about it, is these good-hearted men are killing children. Like, it doesn't make sense when you say it like that, but because I was that man in that sense, I could feel something different. And I would like other people to open their perception also to seeing those men a little bit differently.
Not as the ultimate evil, but as themselves being victims of desensitization. And there's something so horrible about a whole society being desensitized. And I really think that all the worst atrocities of the world happened because there was a system that created the situation of amazing people doing horrible things. It's always the same story if you really dig deep.
Yeah, we are all capable of committing evil deeds.
This is so important to understand.
This is so crucial. And for me also, I can say that the years after the military, I was trying to suppress any connection to that soldier that I was. Because if I was a part of an oppressive army or an army that hurt innocent people, I can't live with myself.
Because then you are a horrible person.
I'm a horrible person, and I can't, it's not possible that I'm a horrible person.
That's why it's not about being a bad person. And that's why when people, there's all this backlash, online, how are you doing this to your own people? How are you speaking against your own people? Like, we're amazing people. Somehow that works when you're living in a system that's oppressive.
When you're human.
When you're human. Yeah.
We hold many parts to us, and this is what's so complicated about who we are, and the fact that we can recognize the part of us that's capable to do evil and to hurt others is the only way out of this.
Exactly. But I think that it takes a lot to realize that like, okay, I'm not a bad person, but I've done bad things,
right,
and now I'm taking responsibility for it. And I also think that the desensitization is very possible when the system is able to fragment all of these. Like, it's so easy to make people not connect the dots. Being able to compartmentalize all of these, I think, is a very strong part of enabling all of this.
I'll just come back to my story, and that's an important part in which I disconnected from that guy, which I had to, that guy that I was. Once I left the military service, and I had a little story at the end of my service where I got in trouble and I was sent to military prison, and that also pushed me farther away because I was kind of slapped in the face
by the system that was
by the
supposed to
system
reward you.
that I was giving my life for.
Yeah. But was it for something connected to the Palestinians? No, it was just...
It was just a clash between me and my commander, and it
you took the Jeep when you weren't supposed to go on a little trip.
Exactly.
I remember this.
So I really, and I'm so grateful for that, because it really changed the trajectory of my life, because I was slapped in the face so hard that I woke up and I said, wow, I'm really not in the right place for me. I shouldn't be in the system. I shouldn't be in such a strict military system. I'm not a man of war. I'm a man of peace. I need to feel free and to be connected to myself. And this is the worst place to be for that. And putting that in my face was like a huge wake-up call. And I said, okay, I can't let myself be in this situation ever again. And I'm not going to let myself do things that I shouldn't be doing and don't want to do. So that was kind of my gift of exiting the system with that kind of strength of, I'm not going to do something that's bad for me and my own being.
Like being at peace with this decision.
Exactly. There was a part of me that was still feeling responsible to stay longer in the military, in the system. They trained me another year, so I ended up spending above or almost 3 years, I guess, in total, just being trained.
Wow.
And then I felt like I had to give back. That's the point. You get trained so you can give what you've been trained for, and that gave me the permission to say, I'm out, so I'm not going to continue longer. And it set me off like way to the other side. And I kind of completely, a week after I was out of the army, I was on a plane to India. I started traveling. And the whole time, I spent 9 months in India, Nepal, Far East, Southeast Asia, dreading the moment of coming back to Israel and having to do reserve military. I was just in an inner conflict, thinking about it constantly, and almost to the degree of, I so don't want to be that man that I was, that military man that was part of a conflict, that held a weapon, that was trained to kill. This is not me. I'm not the man that's trained to kill. I couldn't be that man ever again. And going back to Israel and having to serve in the reserve military until the age of 45 seemed like hell, like true hell. And
by the way, this is the law. Like you couldn't just, like, you had to either find a way to dodge this or go to prison or not come back ever.
Exactly.
That's
and the
options.
easiest way is not to come back ever. For me, it's like, okay,
I'll just keep traveling.
I'll keep traveling. I'll go to Australia. I'll live in the US. I'm just not going to go back because I can't. I had that really strong feeling, and life has a good way of bringing you to where you don't want to go. So I did come back and had to face that. But I spent the next few years in complete denial of anything that had to do with the army. I just pushed it away, didn't want to think, talk, or anything that had to do with politics, with Israelis and Palestinians, with nothing. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't want to think about it because it was loaded with a lot of this pain and this energy of there's maybe bad things going on.
And guilt.
And guilt. And my escapism was into the New Age spirituality, and that was my easiest way out because they tell you create your own reality and you're responsible for your own feelings. And it was very easy to excuse myself from ever thinking about the Israeli-Palestinian story.
I am also wondering about the religious part, because when you enlisted in the army, were you still wearing a kippah?
I was still wearing a kippah. I was still religious. I was praying every morning. it was a gradual process during my military service of taking off my kippah, stopping to keep Shabbat, just...
And were your family aware of this? Like, were they disappointed or?
I think a little bit, but they were pretty open. It wasn't a deal breaker for them. They preferred me to be happy and to be close to them than to follow the rules and regulations of the Jewish tradition. So if it was to choose between me and the rules, they made it clear that I'm more important, which was very supportive, and I'm very grateful for that.
But your friends from the army, from high school, from all your surroundings beforehand, did you talk to them about your intentional distancing from anything regarding the army? And
I didn't have to, because I distanced myself from them too.
Mm-hmm.
How easy is that? If you don't meet or talk to any of the people from those environments, you don't have to face it. Even when my friends from the army would meet, it would be like so far away. I didn't even want to connect to them. I had no wish to involve myself in that surroundings. I really avoided it any way I could.
At this point, you're disconnecting yourself totally from the army, but is there any disconnect from Israel and Zionism? Do you still believe in the Zionist dream that your parents fulfilled when they moved here, or was that disconnected from the war itself?
I remember coming home telling my father, who's more right-wing, that I'm a pacifist. So I use that word. That I'm an anarchist. I use that word too. So different ways to define myself that made sense to me, that I was against the system. It was clear to me I had shifted from being on the right side of the political spectrum to the left side. So it was like, okay, now I'm on the left side. I believed Israel was bad.
This is interesting because I think that most people that define themselves as leftists, especially if they were raised leftists, they don't think that Israel is bad, that this entity is bad. Mm-hmm. But this is what you felt?
In a way, I still had like the connection and the love and the understanding, but I was in a way pushed so far to the other side that it was like, okay, this whole system is really wrong. The indoctrination, the way they teach history, it's like, how could I have been brainwashed so badly? I need to, if you can imagine the pendulum swinging from one side to the other, I just
went to the other side.
Went way to the other side, and it was like, Israel is evil. That's what it felt like.
And what about, okay, so Israel is evil, but what about Zionism as an ideology and as a historical movement? Is that evil? Or is it just as evil as Israel and it's all just part of the same one thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure I thought about it too much and separated between Zionism and Israel. It was like the whole system was expressing, doing evil things, and
was Judaism evil?
Hurting people. No, Judaism is a religion and it's separate from the state. So I didn't.
This is interesting because you grew up in an environment that connected Judaism and Zionism in such a strong way, maybe the strongest in the world. Like this specific community, I don't think that you can compare it to any other part of, the Jewish or the Israeli society that just really thought-wise connects the two together. And so it's interesting that you could make the difference between them, the separation.
Yeah. To me, it still felt like they were different. But with each one, I had my battle. So
your own issues.
Exactly. I grew up within the rules and the stories of the Jewish tradition that suddenly didn't make sense anymore. And I rejected them. And that rejection was either all in or all out. There wasn't a middle ground. So it was like, okay, if I'm not religious because this tradition doesn't make sense, because it's primitive, because they're missing the point, because there's no God, because whatever the reason was to reject Judaism, it meant that all of it was false. There's no, it's like either
it comes
all
together,
of it is
so
true.
it also goes together.
Exactly.
Like it also goes out of the window together.
Happened with Israel and Zionism. It was like, wait, everything I was taught that was the truth for all these years, I see now as lies and false and evil. So it's like, okay, I threw it all out all at once.
And did you have anger in you towards this, towards like maybe your parents or your school, your teachers, your environment, your youth movement group, you know, for being part of this brainwash? Like, did you feel anger?
In a way, I was emotionally not really allowed to connect to the emotion of anger in my life. So it's not a
because
emotion
you were in
of,
the spiritual new age.
well, also, but even growing up in the American Jewish whatever environment I was in my family, anger wasn't an emotion that there was space for or was allowed to express.
There's a feeling that if you're not in the army or actively supporting in any way, that you're not part of it. But this is my opinion. I think that in this situation, in this system that I was describing, you know, beforehand, what force it brings with it, the force of desensitization and the force of brutality and the force of good people doing bad things. I think that in this situation, if you're not acting against it actively, then you're supporting it and you're part of it. And I want to know what you think about that, because
Right.
that's where I'm standing.
Right, and that's a complicated question, and there's a need for that identity. So that's a part of it, and the identity doesn't necessarily require action. I'm just remembering I had this interview when I was describing part of my story and the part of where I was disconnected from the politics, where I didn't want to think about it, talk about it, deal with it, other than defining myself on the left side. And I said I couldn't. I didn't have the ability to be involved in any way because I needed to build myself up again.
Like identity-wise.
Identity-wise, emotional-wise, like there was a part of me that was wounded, and it was like I needed to heal. And the only way I could heal was to be far away in my mind. Physically, I spent a lot of years outside of Israel traveling, to be as far away as possible to heal in a way so that I could come back differently. And really feel that if you would ask me that maybe a few years ago, there would be that guilt of I should be doing more that often comes with why aren't you doing more? And there's a guilt that connects to that.
Like, why aren't you doing more to oppose
Exactly.
your government?
Yes,
or
like
oppose
you
this
have the
occupation?
responsibility to oppose, and you have the responsibility. You're the one, and your voice is so important to change the system, because if you don't, nobody is, and nobody's waking up, and the whole system is sound asleep. And I actually learned compassion to myself in that moment, because I could feel into my own need for time and healing. And that was an incredible insight into myself to say, wow, I was on that side and I went to the other side, and I couldn't think about it and talk about it because it's just so overwhelming. And when you're in it, you can't see it. You can't see your own nose because it's too close. And the time away of not acting, not speaking against, not doing anything actively, I could forgive myself in a sense. I could understand why me and so many others can't.
Yeah.
And one of the big questions is, what does it mean to be an activist? And I think the voices that are pointing at us as these privileged people, which we have so much, and with that privilege comes great responsibility, is as the privileged person, you can't really, like, how can you allow yourself to say, I can't deal with it right now? It's not
Exactly.
fair.
Yeah.
Like, you have to deal with your healing from your privileged place. And like, what kind of...
Like, we don't have time for your healing. Like, we're living under
Exactly.
military
You
occupation.
have
Like, what are you talking about?
every responsibility to use all the energy and the rights that you have and your voice that you have in order to stop human suffering. Like, isn't that your most basic responsibility? And it's such a complicated question, because I can keep turning into myself as the only person I can talk about in this way and say, I can't. I don't have the resources, the tools, the wish, the something inside of me that can just spend all my time and energy to fight the evil doings of the world and of the Israelis. It's just, if I were to do that, this is that the analogy of the parent and child sitting on the airplane, and you put your own gas mask on first, oxygen mask, before you put the child. It's like, if you don't take care of yourself first, you can't fight for anyone else. So, and I feel that way too. As much as I have this privilege, I know that I have to take care of myself. And with all that privilege, it means that I'm not an activist in the way that some people might want me to be or expect me to be. And there's a disappointment in that. But I know for myself, it's like, if I can really take good care of myself and heal, it will have ripples and repercussions that are really much larger. And I really feel that that's my way of being an activist. I know some people are attracted to politics and to being in social movements and to being into peace movements. And I don't have that pull in the same way as some of my friends do. And what is my pull? To do my inner work and to gather with people and with men, maybe. And what if me working with men on connecting to their inner suppressed violence and realizing that they can be those Air Force pilots or those Nazis or those evildoers, and that is in all of us. And if we can integrate that, what if that is the biggest change that we can create just by changing ourselves? Can I read something?
Yeah, sure.
I'm reading from a book called Warriors of the Heart by Danan Perry. And it's about a handbook for conflict resolution. And what is interesting is that it's Warriors of the Heart, which to me, when I swung to the left, I was like, no more warrior. And it's redefining what it means to fight or to be a warrior for a cause that's peaceful or that's coming from the heart. And what does that look like? And it's actually being very active in a way, but not violently, or not in a way that it's coming from the heart.
Like you could be a warrior without being violent. That's what you're saying.
In a way. So Danan in this book is I'm just starting to read it actually, but he's defining what conflict is, and this is what I want to read. And the definition that he gives is different from the definition that we're used to thinking of conflict being a negative thing and being a thing that's bad in a sense. Conflict, an opportunity for intimacy, an eruption of energy characterized by a deep feeling of hurt, resentment, loss, fear, and a challenge to one's self-esteem. It is usually also characterized by the appearance of surface issues and demands that can be argued about, so that the deeper feelings won't have to be felt. Conflict, when handled appropriately, can be a catalyst for increased awareness of ourselves and our connections to one another. It can be the crack in the hard shell of our persona that allows us to begin a journey to the center of ourself.
That's deep.
Yeah, and this brings me back to the healing. And first, it's just for the two of us as Israelis to recognize and just to say, here, we're sitting here and we're recognizing the pain of the other side, and the wrongdoings of our side is just so valuable in itself. And we've spoken about that before. This is the foundation of this movement forward, is to more and more Israelis and strong people or privileged people just to recognize, just to say, sorry, just to say, wow, I see your pain. That must be really hard, just to kind of leave our own shoes and step for a moment and see how hard how horrible, how, it's not imaginable what it's like to be in Gaza. It's like, I can't, it's so far away from me. And to feel that I'm in some way responsible through my government and through my military of my country for what's happening there is hard to really hold that's happening, and then to again come back to the healing of what can we do, because that conversation is so hard to approach. And the reason it's hard to approach is because we haven't faced our demons in our own life, and we haven't really done that inner healing work of being able to look at the fact that maybe I hurt my wife, or maybe I hurt my child, or maybe for me to, it's like a much easier or more accessible path to the problem, to the oppression, is where in my own life am I oppressing? Where in my own life am I in a conflict? Where in my own life am I wrongdoing another person? Am I even capable of seeing that part of me? And like what happened for me by looking at animals and their suffering, only to deduct from that to see, oh wait, if I'm being compassionate to animals and I'm not being compassionate to people, something is not okay. So that was my transition that allowed me to look at everything from a different perspective, and another way is through my own life. Wow, I can't recognize my own violent side within me. So how can I recognize the violent side of my people, of my government, of my country? And this always comes back for me to that deep point, and for men, because this conflict and this oppression is being run and led by immature men, and men who are stuck in their need to show force as a way of not dealing with their vulnerability and their fear. It's like, wait, how can I look at my deep pain and my actual vulnerability and allow myself to be vulnerable instead of
a general.
instead of a general.
Yeah. And it's so telling that all of the leaders, of like the strongest leaders, were all men with a military background. I see that patriarchy is very strong in it, and making men prove their masculinity only through toxic masculinity, and only through war, and only through fighting. And this whole, I'm protecting my wife and my children back at home, and that's why I'm doing this, and that's like the most right thing because I'm a man, and this is what men do. Men protect their families, and it's so distorted. It's like we need to all be protecting each other. And then after this acknowledgement, I think that, that kind of does a lot towards dismantling the imbalance of the power dynamics. So thank you. And I wanted to ask if you have just anything else you want to add. You want to tell the Israeli people, the Palestinian people, the people of the world, the Jews in the world, anything.
Well, thank you, Yahav, for inviting me and for creating the space to speak about these things, and for really listening. And it's an amazing space to open up a different way of relating and talking and listening. So I'm very grateful for that, and I hope that also went through the audio. And my message is the one that I say to myself over and over again, which is the reminder to keep looking inward and to find those places that are unresolved in my own life, in my own past, in my traumas, in my pains, and open up to be vulnerable. I'm also opening up an invitation, if you've listened this far, to go back to the moments that made you angry at me or at Yahav. More at me, I'm inviting, since it's me, to really be angry at me and at the things that I've spoken about, at the things I represent, to kind of let yourself feel that and feel the pain behind it also, of there's really a lot of bad and a lot of pain that's been inflicted in an unjust way. And you have every right to feel a lot of anger about that. So I'm inviting and opening, and you can direct it towards me if it helps, to direct it towards a voice, towards a person, towards an Israeli. And when you can touch that anger and you can touch maybe what's underneath it, the deep pain that have lived through and have gone through, I invite you to let yourself feel that. Maybe a little bit at a time, maybe just a glimpse of it, and know that there's a tip of the iceberg, and that iceberg is huge, and we're really just touching the tip of the amount of pain that is in this world, and that every person that touches another tip of it, it's like we're discovering and
we're melting it.
We're melting this this huge body of pain that exists. And for me, this is what it's all about. If we can slowly touch a little bit more of that pain and allow it to exist and feel it, we're changing the world in a really incredible way.
Thank you, Eran.
So that's the end of another episode of Disillusioned. Thank you so much, Eran, for sharing. Thank you, Ro'i Geva, for the beautiful music. And thank you for listening.